Hello, friends, and welcome to the Rooted and Grounded podcast. Wayne,
We're
Matt.
here.
Hey, brother.
Man,
Yeah, thank y'all for being here.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, glad we can do it.
We've got a fun one today planned.
Oh, good.
So let's, but before we get too deep into it, I want us to talk a little bit about nostalgia. And it seems like people are either really nostalgic or really not. It doesn't seem like there's too much of a middle ground there. So I'm curious, guys, where do you all fall on the nostalgia spectrum?
I'm not very.
Yeah.
I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
I know people who are, and I'm not a hater of people who are,
Well, it's good.
but I do love all people.
Right.
But I'm not. That's just not. I think I'm just too on the go and to be that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think? He's probably the same one.
Yeah, I'm the same on that. I mean, if it's in the back, okay. You look back and say, boy, I'm glad for that. I enjoyed that. And, that was a highlight or that was an enjoyable time, but move on.
Yeah.
It's kind of like.
Maybe every once in a while I have a moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Where I just kind of like thinking about, but then I'm like,
Yeah, I spend more time looking at the windshield than the rearview mirror.
Yeah. Now, what about you?
How about you? Yeah.
No, I'm the same way. I think about, especially with stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
you could fit everything that like I would be sentimental towards. You could probably fit in a little box.
Yeah. Yeah.
A couple
me
of gifts
too.
from Andrea, a few things from
Yeah,
the kids.
exactly.
But,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah,
not,
that's the way I am.
yeah. So
Well, sometimes, I mean, to be honest, sometimes I look at it and I'm like, I know, where did that come from?
Right.
Like, I can't even remember where it was at. I was like, babe,
Exactly.
you don't remember that?
No.
I'm like,
Or Debbie would go, well, we got that on so-and-so right this year. Oh, okay.
yeah.
you just have so many trips you can't remember
Oh,
where you got it from.
Exactly.
Might not have been a trip.
That's hilarious.
So even though the three of us may not be described as the most sentimental or the most nostalgic, I do think we should take a couple of minutes and look back today because as we are approaching the end of the year and wrapping up the first year of the podcast, I think about it kind of like a road trip. And we've been able to make some really cool stops with different people, with different stories, and with different teachings. But there have also been some really pretty views that we've just had to maybe stop and take a picture of, and we haven't been able to explore. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of time to explore some of those things we weren't able to stop at. And so each one of us have a different individual that we have talked about on the podcast, but we weren't able to talk enough about.
Yeah.
And so that's what we will do today. And to kind of set the scene for that, I want to read Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. And it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And so obviously these verses come immediately after Hebrews 11 with so many just heroic individuals from Scripture, the Hall of Faith, as it's often described. And so we each have individuals that could be part of that cloud of witnesses. And so with that in mind, Wayne, why don't you start us off? Who do you want to go back and spend a little time with today?
Well, when you connect Hebrews 12 with that 11 that you just mentioned, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 and 2 is just such a blessing to think about what an encouragement these onlookers are. And that's kind of how I see it. It's, it's almost in my mind, it's like a sports arena. And I'm sure that, our people that are tuning in today would know that they've been there. They've been in a sports arena of some setting, whether it was high school, and they were cheering on, and they were really trying to spur on others to do their best and excited for them. And so they were not only onlookers, they're encouragers. To do it. You can do it. We've been able to do it. Now you can. We're that example. And when I look at Hebrews 12 and I think about that and it says that we run the race. Of course, if we're going to be children of God, then we're going to run the Christian race. And, sometimes it's a struggle. And if you go back and look at the history of the Grecian Games, I mean, one of the really identifying marks in those contexts was the ideal of endurance.
Yeah.
Okay? And so here is the writer of Hebrews trying to encourage us. And man, it's been such a great time for me to doing the podcast, because it's reminded me personally, as we've done several recordings about individuals that fit into this category. And one of those, as I look back, was Esther. Yep. It's just amazing the whole conviction there that she had to have, you know. And I know a lot of our folks will be familiar with that, but if we're not, it's a very short book. It's only 10 chapters. And let me just encourage folks to go back and be reminded about what's happening there, how Queen Esther became the queen, and Mordecai learning this message about people of God. And it took her, you know, in chapter 4, in verse 14, Mordecai says to her, look, this is a critical moment. Right now is a very critical time. And he says, if you remain silent, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And you know whether you have attained royalty for such a time as this. In other words, when you think about the power of God and the providence of God that brought Mordecai and Esther to that moment. Mm-hmm. And then for her to say, okay, you need to be praying about this, so am I. And you know what? If I perish, I'll perish, but I don't lose, because of a conviction to God. But, you know, to have that conviction, the two things that stands out to me about that is just her conviction, yes. But guys, you can't have a deep conviction if you don't have some courage to stand up. You know, we sometimes say the talk is cheap. You know, we can talk the talk, but she walked the walk. I mean, she really did. To have that conviction and then to demonstrate the courage to say, hey guys, if I perish, I perish. And, you know, God has put me here at this moment.
You were talking about Hebrews 12 and how, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking with you, I'm running my race around that track, and all these cloud of witnesses are up in the stands. And as I'm running that race, of course, I'm fixing my eyes on the finish line on Jesus, and that's the thing motivate me. But as I run by, you know, you see in like a basketball gym, those banners, and you see 2010 state champs. And, you know, every once in a while you walk in there and you look at it and you see it and you're like, I remember that team. And I remember the perseverance that they had in that. You look at Esther and hear her story stands, and that story is speaking volumes to us. And you think, here she was in a moment. Like, we can't appreciate really the moment. I mean, if she goes in there and he don't hold out his scepter, she's dead. Right. And he ain't talked to her in a month. I mean, he ain't even seen her. Right. And so whatever that time frame was, it'd been a while. And so, I mean, it was a big deal for her to go in there and for her to say, look, y'all fast, y'all pray, we're going to do the same. And if I die, I die.
And it's amazing that those two things, the fasting and the praying, I think sometimes we kind of let that slip by and we try to do it ourselves. She was going, look, we got to have God involved.
We got to have him. Let's go to the one who can help us.
That's right. Look into him, which goes back to Hebrews 12 too. When you connect, our goal and our focus is on looking into Jesus.
That's right.
Because he's paid the way for us. He knows what it is, and that's exactly the principle there is so true in the story of Esther.
Well, anything else you want to add on the story of Esther?
Well, I just think that when I think about Esther. And we talked about this a little bit, maybe not elaborated a whole lot about it, but Mordecai is, I mean, just a huge part of that story. I mean, just his faith and the way that he maneuvered and the way that he saw God's hand working things out, even in a pressured situation, even where he could have got really mad and had a lot of emotions, you know, in that. He was allowing God to kind of, I mean, you know, it's not like just told of his faith, but you can see it in his actions and the way that he's maneuvering.
Well, those same two words apply to him, don't they?
Yep.
Conviction and the courage to do something.
Yep.
And, it takes courage for us to look to Jesus and to run the Christian race.
That's right.
It takes a lot of courage to do that in our world,
Yeah.
just like it did for her in her world.
Mm-hmm.
At a moment like that. And sometimes we look at our lives and say, maybe this is a moment for a purpose.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, at least myself, maybe I haven't focused on that, and she reminds me of that. So I'm grateful for our discussion of that in the past, because it was not only encouragement for me personally, guys, it was a challenge to be reminded, something that I know, but I don't always apply maybe to the degree that I should.
Yeah, it's like you're here. Like, can you recognize that you're here for this moment?
Right.
Like Mordecai's like, this is here we are.
That's right.
Like, can you believe? It's almost like, can you believe you're a Jew and you're about to go in there and talk to the king, and he loves you, and he's probably going to listen to you. Like, step into it,
Because God is good.
Because God is, he's done. He would not have put us in this place if he didn't think that we could do it.
He's worthy of us having courage.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and I think with Esther, that's one of two books in the Bible that do not mention God
at all
specifically, but how he's working is evident on every page.
Exactly
That's
right.
right.
Every page.
I love that.
Yeah.
And the fact that I think because of that, it doesn't have to be mentioned.
That's right.
It's observable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, Matt, who do you want to go back and look at?
This may be a shocker. Paul the Apostle.
Look, I thought we was going to have to have a drum roll.
Maybe Hardy can add one in.
A little drum roll over Hardy.
But, I think the one area that I really want to focus on, just in remembering back on this thoughts of 1 Timothy, and we did kind of talk about these, but as I'm looking back and just remembering, if I'm running in that race and I'm looking up to the stands and I see that banner of Paul the Apostle, and not the accomplishments that he could boast in, but just the accomplishments of him trusting God just the same way as Esther and Mordecai did, I think about he's being driven by a need for forgiveness. And I'm running in that race and I look up in the stands and I see that idea of forgiveness, but then I fix my eyes back on the finish line, and what I see when I look at Jesus, like, that encourages me. But what encourages me even more is Jesus' understanding that we needed the forgiveness. And I'm just like, wow. Paul was driven by that idea of, I need to be forgiven for what I've done. And Jesus says, oh, I'll absolutely forgive you. And actually, I'm going to use you. It's like, that's unbelievable to me, because I think that does create, if I can get that, Paul truly emptied himself to be filled with what God wanted him to be filled with, and it caused a reaction, man, inside of him. And that's why it's no wonder that the Lord is going to use Paul to be the one to go to the Gentiles, because he knows the reaction. It's like the Lord knows the reaction that you're going to have inside of you if you'll give it to him and let him use you. And I think that sometimes is missed when we don't appreciate what we've been forgiven of, and how Jesus sought that so hard for us.
Yeah. And because you look at Paul, I mean, why wouldn't you want Paul on your team?
Exactly.
With a man with a conviction. And I mean, he when he believed something, he was all in. And when you can have that type of support as a servant of Christ,
yep.
I mean, why wouldn't you want that drive and that energy and that excitement and determination? Because he would be one that you would go, that guy can make a difference. And obviously he did. I mean, you look at him in the New Testament, but it wasn't always easy.
Yeah. Well, and that was, we were kind of tossing this around, and it was that need for forgiveness. But I think the second thing really was, trust through trials. I mean, 2 Corinthians 11, he says, I labored more abundant in stripes above measure, prison more frequently, in deaths often. 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked.
Wow.
A night and a day I've been in the deep, in journeys, perils, journeys often, in perils, waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen. I mean, it's like on and on. And he says, if I must boast, I will boast in the things which concern my infirmity. I was like, what?
When you look at that and hear that list, we don't have any trials.
No, exactly. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm upset because dude ran the red light. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is
He cut in front of me. Wait a minute.
He moved over and wouldn't let me in.
Somebody laughed at me because I believe in Jesus.
Exactly. It's unbelievable to me. Like, so when I'm running the race, and I think that Hebrews 12 becomes so powerful, and I appreciate us talking about this and looking back and how you set it up, because when we run and I look at Paul, I become so encouraged. But the reason why and he encourages me to want to be like him. But then he's like, no, I want you to be like me, because I want you to look at the finish line, because you need to be like him, because that's who I've been trying to be like. That changes that. It's just like another layer of motivation and conviction and encouragement.
I just wonder if, when I think about that conviction of Paul and that trusting God through, obviously, difficult, more than I can even imagine, guys, trials. But it seems to me that the foundation was in 1 Timothy, you mentioned a few moments ago. And I'm not saying this, guys, because, we spent around the time of Thanksgiving in the past here and around giving gifts. But it seems to me that Paul had a motivation, and it started in 1 Timothy 1:12 when he said, I thank the Lord Jesus.
That's right.
He never forgot where he had been and where he was.
Yep.
Well, and I think you bringing up Paul, it's hard to do that and not bring up Barnabas to go with him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I have no doubt that Paul could have done the work of Christ had Barnabas not been there.
That's right.
But you think about those early instances as he goes from kind of fugitive of Christianity to convert, and Barnabas is the one to take him by the hand and say, he's one of ours now.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And you think Ananias and a couple others, and just how important, I don't want to say supporting characters can be to someone's faith, but for people like Barnabas who aren't in the spotlight,
Great
who
thought.
are just mentioned in a handful of chapters.
Exactly.
But had Barnabas not been there, how different would Paul have been, or how different would his ministry have been?
Oh, yeah, because, the brethren would say,
And like in the reality of that, like Paul living through that, we just kind of talk about it. But I mean, when you think about people not wanting you around, I mean, if one person even kind of doesn't invite me to the wedding, I'm like, well, how come I didn't get invited? You know what I'm saying? I mean, these brethren did not want him around because they were scared of him. And Barnabas, you're right. And maybe that's another, as you're circling around on that corner going into the finish line, you look up at Paul, and another stripe on there is this idea of, if you want to be who you need to be in Christ Jesus, you better surround yourself with people who love the Lord more than you, because they will help you.
Yeah, because I know we all have people that would be our Barnabases.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully
you guys are my Barnabases.
And hopefully we're Barnabases
for sure.
to others.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's important to
Great
have
point.
those kind of supporting pieces
For
of
sure.
our faith.
For sure, brother. Yeah, great
Thanks
stuff.
for bringing that up, man.
Right. Anything else we want to touch on, Paul?
Yeah, it was an encouragement.
No.
Thank you, Barnabas.
Thanks. All right, so for mine, I want us to go back to the story of Joseph, and in that episode we looked at the kind of twists and turns of his life and how through all of that God was working it for good. But the point that I want to make is that when we look at the story of Joseph, we're looking more at the story of God than we are of Joseph.
Sure.
And so while the last 13 chapters or so of Genesis focus on Joseph, Joseph is really just the vessel for God's story. And so if you want to follow along, I'm going to read from Genesis 46, and this is after Joseph has revealed himself to his brothers, and the rest of Jacob's family is sent to come and live in Egypt. But look at how God is setting everything up. And so the first 4 verses say, "So Israel, Jacob, took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, 'Jacob, Jacob.' He said, 'Here I am.' Then he said, 'I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes.'" And so, especially if you look at verses 3 and 4, God makes 4 promises to Jacob. Number 1, that he will make him a great nation in Egypt. Number 2, that he will go with him into Egypt, that he will bring him out of Egypt, and then finally that he and Joseph would be reunited. But it's those middle promises that I want to hone in on, of God going with Jacob and his family into Egypt and leaving Egypt with his family. And so this kind of sets the scene that everyone is going, and it's not going to be permanent, but we don't know. I mean, we know how the story ends, but like as you're reading this the first time, you don't know what that ending is going to be. And so if you go to the end of Genesis, to Genesis chapter 50, let's look at this from Joseph's perspective. So Genesis 50, verse 22 says, "Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as his own. And Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.' Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, 'God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here.' So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt." And so while we get so many vivid details about Joseph and his life, it is the story of God. Because as you think about what is going to unfold, obviously, while they're in Egypt, they become the Israelites. They become the Hebrew people. They grow. Joseph is there to kind of set the scene for them to thrive. And as you turn the page from Genesis into Exodus, you're turning the page 400 years. And I think just trying to put that in perspective, if America started in 1776, then 400 years for us would be 2176. So we got 152 years to go to hit 400 years. And you think about all that's happened in America since we started.
That's right.
Almost 250 years ago. And then you look at the people of Israel, and they started with 70 people. And then they grew and they grew and they grew. And there was times that I'm sure things were great. Obviously, by the time we pick up the story in Exodus, things are not. But God says, "I'm going down with you, and I will bring you out." And so I think that's important to remember all of this, that this is God's story.
Yeah.
His timing is not our timing, because 400 years, that's a lot. But when you think about, he leads them out with the fire and with the pillar and does all the miraculous signs, and he leads them in the wilderness, and God is always leading his people, whether it's leading them, like you think about Esther and the ways God is working there, whether it's Paul and how God is using these individuals or these circumstances to further his story, and we get to be a part of it.
That's right.
And I think that's so important for us to remember, is that God is not part of our lives. We're part of his. And
That's good.
And when we get that mixed up, then God becomes our genie in a bottle, and he's not. We are his servants, not he to us. So that's what I wanted to go back and touch on Jacob. But anything you all want to add on Jacob and his story?
Well,
Go ahead.
I think one thing that I just love about, even in Genesis 46, is God actually comes to Jacob and he says, he just continues this same narrative, and he gives a little bit more description. He tells him that I'm going to make you a great nation. Well, that's the same promise he made to Abraham. But now he says, I'm going to make you a great nation in Egypt. And, you know, like for Jacob, it's like, in Egypt? Like, yeah, in Egypt. Yeah. And not only that, and then he goes on and on and on, right? I'm going to bring you out. It's the same stuff that has been continually brought out. And here's Joseph about to die, and he makes them, what does it say? He says, then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. There is something that's going to happen, and it's the same thing that we've been talking about. And we know the story, but you're right. 400 years, you got to give it to these guys. I mean, it had to be tough in that moment, and crying out and crying out and crying out, and having to trust God in those dark moments of life. And I just think that one thing that I can draw encouragement on is, even if I'm considered in the same bracket as an Israelite in year 100 of the 400 years, and I don't receive the exact thing in that moment, what I do know is that God keeps his promise. And so if I don't get it now, I'm going to get it.
Right, because he's faithful.
because it's his story.
Exactly right. And we're just blessed to be a part of his story.
Man, that'll preach.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like Exodus 13:19, it says Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will visit you, and you shall carry up my bones.
They remembered it, man.
400 years later, they remembered.
They held fast to these words, and I think there's just something special about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think about that verse that says, like, with God, a day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. So 400 years is, what, lunchtime?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It's just impossible to comprehend God's
for sure.
God, his perspective of time. If there even is time for God, like there is for us. But Wayne, anything you want to add?
No, I think just the whole idea of this, as I see, it just kind of hit me as we were sitting here discussing this. There's a common thread, and and honestly, we didn't know. You was choosing Paul, I was choosing Esther, but just think about the common thread that we have. We've talked about it, we've hinted at it, that God is faithful. He's always keeping his promise, etc. But look at what we've said. Every one of these three, trusting through trials.
Yep.
Esther with her trials, Paul with his trials, Joseph, Jacob with their trials, and God has demonstrated to them and to us in our lives. He's worthy of our trust.
He's worthy.
He's worthy.
Yeah.
Amen. All right, so let's wrap it up. Matt, why don't you kick us off?
I don't even want to wrap it up.
Wrap it up. I mean, Christmas time, you got to wrap it up.
Wrap it up, guys.
Get your paper out and wrap it up.
Round world.
Who else do you want to talk about?
Oh, don't ask him, man.
Here's what I want to say. First of all, I appreciate you, brothers. Hardy, I appreciate you too. This has been really good. I'm really excited to keep pressing on. I just think that this is, it's a time where we can sit here and just think about just how good God is. And, think about, just right here ending on Jacob and Joseph so early on, God is just setting something in motion that we can look up in the banners and see. And really, when I've turned and fixed my eyes where I need to fix it, that's where it was leading me, right to the King. And I just appreciate these guys and their love for God and allowing me to be encouraged to know that if they could do it, I could do it too.
And it started with Jesus. Because Hebrews 12:2. Go back to where we started.
Yep.
Look into Jesus, who for the joy.
Yep.
And the joy that he endured the cross. The fact that he said, I came to do my Father's will. That's what it was all about. And then on the cruel cross, I did it.
Yep.
And he finished by saying, it is finished.
Yep.
For the joy. So we can have joy because he is the leader, he's the perfecter, and he's the founder of our faith.
Yep.
Well, and I say for me is you don't necessarily know what role you're playing in God's story at the time. And like with Joseph, as significant of a role as he played, he's not in the lineage of Christ. That's his brother. Or you look at Esther and you go from orphan to beauty pageant winner to queen, and she is. Or you look at Paul from persecutor to missionary, and we talked about several others. Is just, you don't know what role you're playing in God's story and to who it's impacting. You don't know who you're a Barnabas to. You don't know who you're a Paul to. You don't know what you may be setting up for future generations. And I think that's why it's important that we keep everything in a broader context than today, because what we do is impacting our family and will impact their families and so on, and the church, and for as long as things continue. And that, I think that's mine of just things are a lot bigger than us, but just because they're bigger doesn't mean we don't have a big role to play.
That's right. That's a good point.
Well, guys, great discussion today.
Good job.
Hopefully everyone listening and watching you benefited from it as well. And it is the season of giving. And so normally we come to you every 2 weeks, but we'll make a treat for you. And we will come back next week for a special Christmas episode. So we hope you will, we hope you will join us for that. And until then, have a blessed week.
See ya.